Here in Australia, we learnt the very next day that the appalling Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, and her colleagues in the Labor Party have disgustingly decided to start resending Australian tax dollars, your money and the money of hard-working Jewish Australians, back to UNRWA, the utterly discredited United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which is being investigated for the alleged links between some of its employees, which we've detailed here on the show, and the terrorist outfit Hamas. I've been warning about UNRWA for years on this show and in The Spectator Australia. Here's what Andrew Wallace, the Liberal National Member for Fisher on the Sunshine Coast, who is also Deputy Chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, had to say about Penny Wong's grotesque decision. Quote, "Today, the Albanese Labor government have made the inexplicable decision to reinstate $6 million of Australian taxpayers' money to the embattled United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, despite investigations continuing into allegations of corruption and complicity with the massacre by Hamas of 1,200 innocent Israelis on October 7th last year. At least a dozen UNRWA employees are alleged to have been involved in the brutal attacks on October 7th, with reports that staff provided support through logistics, weapons procurement, and direct participation in the kidnap and massacre of innocent Israeli citizens by Hamas terrorists. Direct participation, he says. Andrew goes on. These were teachers, social workers, administrators, and warehouse workers paid by taxpayers through UNRWA contributions. Supporters of terror, funded in part by the tax dollars of hard-working Australians. He goes on, Australians are right to expect the federal government to withhold any further funding from UNRWA, and they are rightly concerned that the federal government has breached its responsibility to uphold the norms of fundamental human decency. Well said. The decision to resume funding to UNRWA, which, I may remind you, was agreed to and urged by the Teals, the hands that signed this paper, without any independent findings, is an appalling affront to the people of Israel and to Jewish Australians who continue to suffer at the hands of Hamas terrorists and their allies. Well said, Andrew Wallace. The Sunshine Coast can be proud of you. And may I add, many Australians and Australian Jews are rightly absolutely furious at this decision. And let nobody, as I said, forget the role of the Teals in signing this letter. This letter. The Teals, the hands that signed the paper, clearly no friend of Israel, in my opinion, urging Penny Wong to recommence sending your money to UNRWA. There is now a petition on change.org called "The Labor Government in Australia Needs to Stop Funding to UNRWA." So go on to change.org and sign that. Finally, on a slightly lighter note, it would appear that some people who traditionally did view themselves as of the left are waking up to how idiotic and wrong it is to side against Israel. Here's Bill Maher, once a paragon of the left, but in danger, I suspect, of becoming a pariah if he keeps on coming up with proper comments like this.
For all the progressives and academics who refer to Israel as an outpost of Western civilization like it's a bad thing, please note, Western civilization is what gave the world pretty much every liberal precept that liberals are supposed to adore. Individual liberty, scientific inquiry, rule of law, religious freedom, women's rights, human rights, democracy, trial by jury, freedom of speech. Please, somebody stop us before we enlighten again. And since one can find all these concepts in today's Israel and virtually nowhere else in the Middle East, if anything, the world would be a better place if it had more Israels. Of course, this message falls on deaf ears to the current crop who reduce everything to being only victims or victimizers, so Israel is lumped in as the toxic fruit of the victimizing West. The irony being that all marginalized people live better today because of Western ideals, not in spite of them.
What a shame we don't have anybody like that on the ABC. Instead, this week, we learned that the taxpayer-funded ABC has disgraced itself over Israel by cancelling an iconic Australian singer, songwriter and author for holding views that the AB said were controversial. In other words, because as a Jew, she has publicly supported the continued existence of Israel. She has since, I'm glad to say, been invited back. But as I say, if you still don't get it, let me spell it out yet again. The modern left in all its manifestations, Labour, Greens, Teals, are no friends of the Jews. In my opinion, if you choose to associate with the modern left, which includes the US Democrats in Canada, Trudeau's Liberals in Australia, labelled Greens, Teals, you risk aligning yourself with a pernicious political ideology that is fundamentally opposed to Jewish values and has no qualms about facilitating the destruction of the Jewish state.